Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we've got an episode of Spare Change. Some episodes just don't fit in any of my other playlists, so this is where they end up. The topics on these episodes can vary pretty widely, so stay tuned to see what's in store for this one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. In my recent What to Watch episode, I brought up the Casually Competitive YouTube channel. It's a relatively new channel on the scene with some really high quality Commander content. To know what their channel's about, well, I'll just have Joseph tell you.
What is up, everyone? My name is Joseph and I run Casually Competitive MTG, a YouTube channel focused on high-powered EDH, producing professional and high-quality content such as gameplays, podcasts and discussion videos, deck techs, live streams, and more.
So after that What to Watch episode, many of you were interested and reached out about them, so I figured a collaboration had to happen. So today, Joseph from Casually Competitive is going to take you through an amazing high-powered deck tech.
Hello everyone, my name is Joseph and I'm from Casually Competitive MTG, and today I want to talk about one of the commanders that has become one of my favorite in recent times in that high-powered semi-competitive meta, and that commander is Ruric Thar the Unbowed. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this commander, you may be wondering what he can bring to a competitive table since he doesn't have blue and a lot of other common combo colors. However, he brings something very relevant to the table, and that thing is disruption. Ruric Thar is a very good deck at stopping your opponents from comboing off, but before we get into the cards you need to put into this deck, let's take a look at Ruric Thar specifically. So looking at the card, we can see that Ruric Thar the Unbowed is a 6 mana, 4 colorless, a red and a green, 6/6 Ogre Warrior who has Vigilance and Reach, and he must attack each turn if able. Now, having a 6/6 on the battlefield is not irrelevant even at these higher powered tables, but what's really important about Ruric Thar is the next line of text. It reads, whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Ruric Thar deals 6 damage to that player. And with a lot of combos and loops involving non-creature spells, this can really stop someone in their tracks, so let's talk about how you can build Ruric Thar to do just that. So the rest of this video is going to be separated into 3 segments. First, we'll talk about the general strategy of the deck, then we'll talk about how to win with this deck, and then we'll finish up the discussion part of this video with some tactics and single card discussions to outline the playstyle of this deck and really show you how you can get to the point when you can win. First off, let's talk about a general summary of the strategy. Strategy, honestly, is pretty straightforward. You want to ramp out Ruric Thar quickly, get him on the battlefield, and then slow down and disrupt your opponents, all while building towards your own win. And now that we have a general idea of what this deck is trying to do, let's talk about some specific win cons that synergize really well with your general strategy. In this section of the video, I want to talk about 3 efficient lines that you can take to victory. Now, even though this deck is built and geared to be played at a higher powered table, only one of the win conditions that I'm going to be talking about is going to be one that is an infinite combo or any type of loop. So if you're the type of player that likes to play powered up decks but isn't a huge fan of just packing it full of combos, this might be the deck for you. That being said, for the first win condition, we are going to talk about this combo because it does take a little bit more of an explanation, and it's nice to get that out first. So the first line we're going to talk about is a Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker win condition. The goal of this win condition is to get 2 parts. A top part of the combo, which is a Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker or a Splinter Twin, as well as a bottom part of the combo, which in this deck list we're using Zealous Conscripts and Hyrax Tower Scout. The reason that we're using these creatures is because when either of them enters the battlefield, we're able to untap our quote-unquote top piece of the combo with the Enter the Battlefield effect, so both of these creatures can be used to help us perform this loop. with Kiki Jiki and one of the bottoms on the battlefield at the same time, you're able to activate Kiki Jiki to create a hasty token copy of whatever bottom half of the combo that you're using. For this example, let's assume we have Kiki Jiki and Hyrax Tower Scout on the battlefield. The steps for this combo are as follows. Tap Kiki Jiki targeting Hyrax Tower Scout to make a copy of it. When the new copy token with haste comes into the battlefield, untap Kiki Jiki. You can then repeat this process to make as many Hyrax Tower Scout copies with haste that you want, and you can then go to combat and swing them all at your opponents. The same can be done if you have Splinter Twin instead of Kiki Jiki. The only difference is that you would want to enchant the Hyrax Tower Scout rather than playing them separately as two different creatures. Now, before we move on to the next win condition, I want to talk about a specific interaction because it varies just slightly. The interaction I'm going to talk about is between Splinter Twin and Goblin Sharpshooter. It's very similar to regular Kiki Jiki and Splinter Twin lines, but there's a specific set of steps you have to take in order to do this correctly, so I wanted to go over it. So to start off, unlike the regular Kiki Jiki lines, there are some prerequisites for this line. The first one being is you have to have a Goblin Sharpshooter on the battlefield that does not have Summoning Sickness. The next requirement is there needs to be any 1 toughness creature on the battlefield under anyone's control that isn't your Goblin Sharpshooter. So once those conditions are met and you have Splinter Twin ready to cast, these are the steps you're going to want to take. Step 1, cast Splinter Twin, targeting your Goblin Sharpshooter. With your Sharpshooter then enchanted, tap your Goblin Sharpshooter to make a copy of it. So now you have 2 Goblin Sharpshooters, 1 tapped, 1 untapped with haste. Tap your second Goblin Sharpshooter in order to ping any 1/1 on the board that isn't your original Sharpshooter. When it dies, you will untap both your original Sharpshooter and your token copy. What you want to do next is tap your original Sharpshooter to make a third Goblin Sharpshooter also with haste. The next step you want to take is to tap your second Goblin Sharpshooter to target your newly acquired third Goblin Sharpshooter. In response to this activation, tap the third Goblin Sharpshooter to deal 1 damage to any of your opponents. The damage will then go through, this third copy of Goblin Sharpshooter will die, and you will untap your original 2. Now you're back to where you started, so you can repeat this loop, dealing 1 damage to one of your opponents every time the loop is performed, and you're able to loop this as many times as you want. So that's the main win condition in this deck, and for the next ones, let's take it back a step and do something a little bit simpler. For our second main line to victory, we're going to be using Shaman of the Forgotten Ways. This 3 mana 2/3 that taps for 2 mana of any combination for creature spells is a pretty decent ram spell, but it also has a little bit of text tacked on at the bottom that I think you'll all be very interested in. For 11 mana and a tap, you can make everybody's life total be equal to the number of creatures that they control. Now, in some of these higher powered tables, having a board of creatures is not something that's super common, so you may just be able to take someone out with this activation, but if not, chances are really good that you will still be in the best position once this activation resolves. Now, there is the requirement of having a total power of 8 or greater on the board, but with a 6/6 commander, it's really not that hard to do. The 11 mana for the activation may also seem like a hurdle when you're just looking at this card, but this deck runs a lot of mana acceleration to the point where having 11 mana early on in the game is not that unreasonable with the amount of mana accelerants that this deck runs. Now we've talked about a combo line, a little bit of a spicier line. Let's take it back to just the bare basics. Let's talk about how you can win with just combat damage. While this deck does contain some combos, let's not forget that Ruric Thar himself is a 6/6 with Vigilance and Reach. It's very unlikely that anyone's going to be safely swinging into you, giving you the opportunity to deal damage to them without them being able to retaliate to the same extent. They'll also be taking 6 damage every time they cast a non-creature spell, so removing Ruric Thar becomes much more difficult. There are cards in this deck like Finale of Devastation to pump up your board once you have your creatures established, but Ruric Thar himself is just a force to be reckoned with and can a lot of times just give you the edge you need in order to win through combat damage. So now that we've gone over the general strategy and the ways to win, let's talk about how you can play the early to mid game in order to get you to where you want to be. We'll be going through 6 tactics or categories of cards and explaining them, giving some examples in order to give you the experience you need in order to start playing this deck. So the first category to talk about today is ramping early. This deck is packed full of early game plays in the form of mana dorks and early ramp cards. Cards like Llanowar Elves, Arbor Elf, and Orcish Lumberjack all go a very long way in allowing you to get the mana you need in order to cast Ruric Thar as early as possible. As the game progresses, your ways to ramp out scales accordingly, with some higher CMC mana dorks that generate more mana, like a Somberwald Sage, a Priest of Titania, or a Greenweaver Druid. These cards are great to set yourself up to either play or replay Ruric Thar if he gets targeted a little too early, or gives you the mana you need in order to activate Shaman of the Forgotten Ways much faster than your opponents are probably expecting. Another great card to think about in early ramp, and a card I wanted to talk about specifically, is Treasonous Ogre. With Treasonous Ogre, you can make super flashy plays using all of your 40 life to your advantage in order to just ramp your board to crazy extents. A nice thing about this deck specifically with Treasonous Ogre is you're able to amass a fairly large board in order to protect yourself if you weren't able to win off that early Treasonous Ogre play. This card is fantastic in this deck and goes a long way with getting you to where you need to be. So now that we've talked about what you want to look for in the early game, what spells are you going to try to ramp into when it's not the spells you're using to win? Well, like I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, one big part about this Ruric Thar deck is combo disruption. You want to be playing cards that disrupt your opponent's combos without really affecting your game plan at all. Cards that are great for this are Damping Sphere, Phyrexian Revoker, and Thorn of Amethyst. Now, Thorn of Amethyst may be a little bit on the pricier side, but if you're playing at a table that runs a lot of non-creature based combos, this 2-mana artifact can get so much value with stopping a lot of combos before they're even able to start. Now, before we move on to the next tactic, a card I want to specifically point out is Possibility Storm. Before we talk about how this card is so incredibly good in this deck, let's take a second to read it because this is a wall of text on this card. This card reads, whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, that player exiles it, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a card that shares a type with this. That player may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then put all cards exiled with Possibility Storm on the bottom of their library in a random order. Now, this sounds a little confusing and sounds like it could backfire, but let me paint you a picture. You have Ruric Thar in the battlefield against a heavy control player who can't cast a lot of their combo pieces, so they try to cast a Chain of Vapor targeting Ruric Thar. If you have Possibility Storm on the battlefield, well, they're going to be taking 6 damage from the cast, and then they're going to start flipping cards until they hit another instant. If they're a heavy control deck, it's probably going to be a counterspell, which won't really affect Ruric Thar. If it is something that can bounce Ruric Thar, well, sure, they can get rid of Ruric Thar and take 6 more damage for it. And ideally, you can just recast Ruric Thar on your next turn. Outside of this example, Possibility Storm does a fantastic job at just stopping your opponents from reliably being able to cast their combo pieces, and since your deck does focus pretty heavily around combat-based damage, having Ruric Thar in the battlefield and just swinging every turn can many times get you where you need to be while your opponents are still trying to randomly flip into one of the cards they need. So now that we've talked about how we can protect the game by disrupting your opponent's combos, let's talk about another type of disruption, and that's mana disruption. One of the great things about playing a mana dork heavy deck in a higher powered or competitive environment is that you can play very effective artifact and other mana hate pieces without them really affecting you. Cards like Collector Oof to turn off your opponent's artifacts, Manglehorn to make all those artifacts enter tapped as well as taking one out on its way in, or a card like Root Maze to really slow down anyone who's not playing creature-based ramp, can all be used to give you the time you need to establish your board state before your opponents have a chance to interact. If you aren't able to draw into these good proactive cards early, then mid-game mana disruption cards like Ruination or Magus of the Moon can quickly turn off 4 to 5 colored decks by making their mana a little less reliable, and a card like Meltdown can do a great job at just wiping the board of artifacts, all for sometimes as little as 3 mana. Again, like I said, these effects don't really stop you too much as you have a land base primarily consisting of basic lands, and there aren't many artifacts that this deck runs, so wiping the board of artifacts, while it may affect you, is almost always worth it. So now that we've gone over pieces that may paint a target on your back, let's talk about some protection pieces that this deck runs that can help you get to where you need to be, even if your opponents are expecting what you have planned. Cards like Veil of Summer, which gives all of your permanents hexproof and makes your spells uncounterable from blue or black spells. Savage Summonings, which makes your next creature cast uncounterable. Or Red Elemental Blast, that counters a target blue spell, can all go a very long way with helping you get your spells resolved or protecting your board state if someone's trying to target you. Outside of just instant speed interaction, there are quite a few permanents in this deck that you can just drop early in order to protect you later on, like Destiny Spinner and Prowling Serpapod, which make your creatures uncounterable, and Rhythm of the Wild, which is a 3-mana enchantment that not only makes your creature spells uncounterable, but also gives all your creatures haste. And in a mana dork heavy deck, that is fantastic. This card specifically can be such an all-star in this deck because it just gives you so much advantage and really protects you, especially against that pesky blue player at the table. So we've talked about how to play the early game, how to disrupt your opponents, how to protect yourself. Let's talk about what you can do if you do happen to get behind and you're trying to stop the person in the lead. Let's talk about your control package in this deck. First, this deck is packed with a good amount of artifact and enchantment-based removal. Cards like Cindervines, Nature's Claim, and Reclamation Sage are all very effective and can be used to remove very specific problematic pieces that are on the board. If your opponents are trying to play a creature strategy that you really aren't too thrilled about, a quick Pyroblast to deal with that problematic blue permanent, or a Sudden Demise to deal X damage to each creature of a chosen color can go a long way to reset your opponent's board to give you a chance to catch back up. The last card I want to talk about for this control package is a card that I think does a lot of work in a deck like this, and that card is Inferno Titan. On the surface, you may be questioning why you would add this specific 6-mana creature into this deck, but in a higher powered or competitive environment where a lot of the creatures are valuable but pretty low toughness, this can kill 1 to 2 creatures every combat step. And another nice bonus of this card is that it does help our combat-based strategy because not only is he a 6/6, but you can pump him up as much as you have red mana for. And realistically, 6 mana in this deck is nothing. You should be able to hit that pretty early on. So we've talked about all of the good winning pieces, all of the good control pieces. We've talked about it all, but how are you going to get these cards in your hand? Well, finally, for this last tactic, let's talk about how you can draw cards in this deck. To start off, we have Okame Adversary, who is very commonly a 2-mana elf warrior that has Death Touch, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Another good card is Runic Armasaur, which is a 3-mana 2/5 that reads, whenever your opponent activates an ability of a creature or land that isn't a mana ability, you may draw a card. This means that all of your opponent's fetch lands now draw you a card. So you're making them either decide between giving you value and getting their land, or you're keeping them off mana. Overall, a win-win for you. Another great way to draw in a creature-based strategy is Orin Frostfang. This card reads, attacking creatures you control have Death Touch, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. What this card allows you to do is take all of your 1/1s that were useful for mana in the early game and turn them into relevant swingers. Sure, they're just a 1/1, but now they have Death Touch when they attack, so your opponents are much less likely to block unless they absolutely have to, meaning you're either killing one of their creatures for one of your mana dorks, or you're drawing a card. Again, a really good win-win situation for you. Outside of creature-based draw, we do have a few other cards that can give us cards in our hand. A card like Kenrith's Transformation does say draw a card on it. However, you're also able to use it to get rid of any problematic creature on the board and turn them into an elk. Another great multi-purpose card is a card like Return of the Wild Speaker, which for 5 mana can draw you cards equal to the greatest power among non-humans you control, which if you control your commander is 6 cards, but it also allows you to pump all your creatures up if you don't need any card draw and you're just trying to swing out. These multi-purpose cards like this and the others we've mentioned go so far to give you a very versatile deck to deal with whatever you need to when the time comes. Outside of drawing cards, this deck list does come filled with some great tutors that tutor creatures from your library to the battlefield. Cards like Eldritch Evolution that allows you to sacrifice a random 3-drop and just magically transform them into Kiki Jiki. Green Sun Zenith that can get you a mana dork early in the game, or grab you that 5-drop Orin Frostfang later in the game. And then there's also cards like Woodland Bellower, which gets you some essential combo pieces like Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, Hyrax Tower Scout, or if you don't need any of that, just gets you a nice 3-drop while also putting a 6/5 creature onto the battlefield. It's just great value that synergizes so well with your overall game plan. So that all being said, the deck list that I've put together for this video comes to around 198.85 on TCG Player after optimization for lightly and moderately played card, including shipping, not including basic lands. So overall, in terms of competitive or high-powered decks, it's fairly reasonably priced and can still sit with some of the better decks in the format. That being said, what are some good upgrades for this deck? Well, let's take a look at the land base. This deck comes with some really great lands, but cards like Cavern of Souls to play an uncounterable Ruric Thar, an Ancient Tomb to ramp just a little bit faster, and the fetch lands to fix your colors in case you're ever in that situation can really help out. Other disruption pieces that are good for this deck are cards like Blood Moon, Null Rod, Price of Glory, Stranglehold, and Trinisphere, all while being a little bit more costly, are great disruption pieces to look at for upgrades because they synergize fairly well with your game plan and really do a lot of work to disrupt your opponents. In terms of draw, cards like Sylvan Library is a fantastic card to get cards into your hand, and Miri's Guile, while it isn't card draw, is fantastic card selection to make sure you have even better cards in your hand. In terms of tutors, good upgrade targets are Worldly Tutor, Court of Calling, Fauna Shaman, and Survival of the Fittest. These all help you improve the efficiency and consistency of your deck by allowing you to tutor up the creatures you need exactly when you need them. The last upgrade section we're going to talk about is Ramp. I think it's going to come to nobody's surprise when I suggest Mana Crypt and Mana Vault as fantastic pieces in this deck, as Ruric Thar does have quite a bit of colorless mana attributed to him, so having an early Mana Crypt or Mana Vault can go a long way, and then when you play your Collector Oof later on to shut off artifacts, doesn't bother you too much because you already have your Ruric Thar. Even without these upgrades, however, this deck is still very consistent and very fun to play, so I hope you guys have enjoyed this little deck tech and deck explanation of a higher powered or more competitively focused Ruric Thar.
Again, a big thanks to Joseph and the Casually Competitive team. Make sure that you check out their channel for some high quality Commander content. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this high powered deck. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.